Hey, Tyler, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh man, when I was a kid, I really, really wanted to be a train engineer, otherwise
Oh,
a train conductor, right?
yes.
That was
I
the
re-
dream. Yeah.
I remember that. You were definitely interested in that for a very long time.
Yeah, it's no surprise that I got into theme parks and roller coasters with trains, so
Trains. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, when you're the operator of the ride, then you are, in a sense, an engineer, a
yeah,
conductor who's not actually on the train.
right. Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, I think that's a fair connection there. But what about you? What did you want to be when you were a kid?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm a little embarrassed, but to be honest, I wanted to be the most adorable tap dancing ballerina fairy prince veterinarian in the whole world.
Wow. Yeah, I could definitely see that coming from
Yeah,
you. That's yeah.
thanks. I wasn't strong enough in math. I couldn't cut it.
Ah, yes. I know that does stop a lot of people from entering that field.
Yeah. I had everything else, all the other prerequisites, but I couldn't get that part.
Yeah.
It's a
That's
shame.
that's a real shame.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Woeful Wednesdays. Nathan reads a series of unfortunate events. Ignore the tattoo. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
If you are new to this, we are reading through the entire series of books from a series of unfortunate events written by Lemony Snicket, really written by Daniel Handler. And we're doing 3 videos for each book, 1 video a week. And we are breaking it up into chapters 1 to 4, 5 to 8, and then 9 to 13. And we are specifically looking at book the 11th this week, The Grim Grotto, and at chapters 9 to 13. And I should mention that this is my first time reading this series, and you have read this before, including as a middle grade reader.
Right. Yes. And so I believe we actually have two sponsors for this week's episode.
We do,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh,
Rolling in the dough.
I
Uh,
know.
yeah, so I have the ad copy for the first one here, and it is What's up, wasabi?
Oh,
When you're
wasabi.
when you're facing the bugaboo of the mycological pantheon, just take a whole spoonful of What's up, wasabi. Strong enough to kill mushrooms, not strong enough to kill a baby.
Oh, that's the perfect strength.
I know, right?
The absolute perfect strength. How many babies do you think they lost in the process of trying to determine that? No, it's too powerful. There goes another one.
I don't think they want us to talk about that anymore.
Ah, it's fine. That one was never going to be a Gerber baby. Am I right? Real ugly. Did you just call that baby ugly?
Oh dear. Yeah, so go out and get your wasabi today.
I absolutely will, and I'm going to ask for it in the store just like that.
Yep.
And this podcast is also brought to us by the Water Cycle. The Water Cycle, not just the business of your urologist.
Okay.
It's yeah, putting children to sleep in literature since 2004. Is this when the book
Yeah,
was
I think
published?
so.
I think since 2004.
Yep.
But yeah, talk to your urologist or to a meteorologist today.
Yeah, sounds great.
All right, folks, I hope you enjoy. Ignore the tattoo! Nathan unfortunately reads a series of unfortunate events at an unfortunate age, which in this case is being used to indicate that he is entirely too old to be reading this for the first time. Okay, so we are specifically looking at chapters 9 to 13 in The Grim Grotto, book the 11th, and Tyler, you have got plot summary duty for the week.
Yeah, so we pick up this week, right where we left off with the Baudelaires being captured by Count Olaf, being the Queequeg is somehow absorbed into the.
I'm glad that you used the word somehow because I was just like, did something happen to me? Did I not catch how this happened?
Yeah, I felt the same way. I'm like, I must be falling asleep or something, but
Right.
yeah, I don't.
Somehow is the right word. It somehow gets absorbed into Olaf's submarine
Right.
and
Yes.
somehow gets out by the end
Right.
of this.
Yes. Yeah, gets back out into the open sea while they're still working on fixing that
Yep.
porthole. I don't really
Yes.
get that. I don't. I just.
Yep. To quote
That's
Austin Powers, the sheer physics of it are mind-boggling.
right.
How did any of this work? But okay.
Yep, no idea. But anyway, so they get boarded by Count Olaf, who takes them prisoner, throws them in the brig, and this means that Fiona is reunited with her brother,
Hmm.
Fernald, I believe. Um,
Yeah, I know. I'm
who,
like, good luck pronouncing that. I don't know how you pronounce that name.
yeah,
Fernald?
maybe. Yeah.
Fairnold. I don't know.
I don't know either. But that's the name of the hook-handed man, and for some reason, uh, Lemony Snicket decides to continue calling him the hook-handed man, even though we now have a name associated with him.
That's a good point. Continuing to objectify and dehumanize him.
Yep.
Yep.
But yes, so Fiona is reunited with her long-lost brother, and then there's this whole issue of whether or not Fiona will side with Fernald or with the Baudelaires. Um, but regardless, Fernald, the hook-handed man, helps the Baudelaires and Fiona to get back to the Queequeg, but Fiona and Fernald are spotted, and so they do not make it back. The children find uh, find out that they need horseradish in order to prevent Sunny's death by form of medusoid mycelium.
Hmm.
Um, and they do not have that. However, they do come across wasabi, which Sunny somehow knows is Japanese horseradish. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's a substitute, I guess, of
well, I
sorts.
actually I
Okay.
looked it up, and it is actually referred to as Japanese horseradish, and it is in the same like family as
Oh, okay.
horseradish.
Okay.
I know. I was like, oh, there's actually a lot more to this than I thought.
Okay. Well, that works.
Yeah. Because yeah, I know. I'm reading it, like, wait, that a thing? And I was like, oh, well
All
done.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, so they save Sunny, and then they take the rest of the wasabi for themselves, that being Violet and Klaus, so that they will be immune, I guess. Um, and then, yeah, Count Olaf finds them on the Queequeg. Fiona has joined Fernald and everyone else from the Carmelita. um, and yeah, the Baudelaires manage to. It's Fiona is supposed to take them to the brig, but she doesn't.
Mhm.
And instead, then the Baudelaires manage to get the Queequeg out of the Carmelita. It's very odd. And then the Baudelaires wind up on Briny Beach, where they are confronted by Mr. Poe and decide not to go with him, but rather to hop aboard this taxi cab with a mysterious figure who turns out to be Kit Snicket.
Yeah. I always wished that if I got into a mysterious car and there was Kit inside, it would be the Knight Rider car.
Right.
So disappointing. Like, oh, just a regular person.
My name's Kit. Whoa, this is awesome. Let's open the door. Oh, it's an actual
It's just a regular
person.
driver. Whoa, why would you do that? And why is your cab a Trans Am?
Right. Oh dear. Yeah, so I think I got most of the points there.
You
There's a
got it.
bunch of details that happen in between, but yeah, those are the major things.
Yeah, you got it. All right, well, let's get into our notes for the chapters. So I don't think I've got too many, actually. I guess, do you want me to go first for chapter 9?
Sure.
All right, so I've really only got one note of significance for this chapter, and it's at the very beginning where my notes often are, because you get these Snicket monologues.
Hmm.
And he says, if you are considering a life of villainy, and I certainly hope that you are not, there are a few things that appear to be necessary to every villain's success. One thing is a villainous disregard for other people, so that a villain may talk to his or her victims impolitely, ignore their pleas for mercy, and even behave violently toward them if the villain is in the mood for that sort of thing. And then, you need to have a villainous imagination, so then you can spend your free time dreaming up treacherous schemes. And then you also need to have a small group of villainous cohorts who can be persuaded to serve the villain in a hench personal capacity, and you need to have a villainous laugh. But it really seems like, I wonder how much of this is acting as, I forget the term for it, but I know that there's a proper literary term. Is it? That's going to bug me. But basically, for stories that teach children uh, morals and how to be a good person.
Hmm. Right. Yeah.
It's terrible that I can't remember it, but it just seems like if you want to be anything except for a villain, then you need to develop compassion for other people.
Right.
And the thing
Yeah.
is that children often lack compassion. And it's something that I don't know how much of it is just a natural part of maturity and how much of it is socialized into children. But I've heard psychologists talk about this before. But if you think about it, then when children are developing psychologically and emotionally as they develop, one of the issues is that they only think of themselves, right? That
Right.
kids can be
Yeah.
very selfish, that they can sometimes have a difficult time sharing their toys, sharing things with other kids, or they want something immediately, or they push other people, like they push other kids. They'll pinch them if they're frustrated or they want something. And if you
Yeah.
think about it, most people grow out of that. We learn when I push somebody or when I pinch somebody, it hurts. And even though it doesn't hurt me, I do understand that sensation. And every time I do that to somebody else, I am inflicting pain on that person. And so while it might serve a purpose to do this, the reason I don't is because I'm compassionate.
Right. Yeah.
And that's something that you need to develop in children to get them to recognize that you need to have compassion for other people. And some kids get that better than others, and some kids learn it sooner than others. Of course, some adults don't have that trait whatsoever, right? Some
Right.
people just emotionally never mature to that point. But I wonder if that's what it is, because he's saying one thing is a villainous disregard for other people, so that a villain may talk to his or her victims impolitely, ignore their pleas for mercy, and even behave violently toward them if the villain is in the mood for that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And I mean, if you've ever had a terrible boss, you know what I mean? Talking impolitely to other people, having a disregard for them, and just, it just seems to be some kind of commentary on that, of instructing children in how to be a fully functioning member of society.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. Um, yeah, I like that reading of that. Um, all
It's
right.
just, I guess I find it strange because I feel like kids are beyond this by middle grade, but
Right.
that seems like something to be in a children's storybook, not middle grade. That's where I'm like, I don't know if that's what he's doing, and it doesn't seem quite right. But at the same time, even adults can use that lesson reiterated from time to time
Yeah,
of,
that's
are
what
you showing regard or disregard for other people when you do this?
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I think that it is sort of a, you know, a reminder more than um, an outright, this is the first time you're learning about this, but this is the lesson. Uh,
Right.
and yeah, because I think that, those are formative years, and if you can manage to catch a few kids who haven't quite learned the lesson yet, then
Right. Yeah, sorry. I'm
Um,
trying to look it up to see if I can find the term for it, but I don't know. I guess for lack of a better term at this point, just a morality tale.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's
all
all
right.
that I
You
had
said
for chapter 9.
okay. All right. I have two notes. My first one is on page 196. This is toward the top of the page. Uh, I'll just start from the top of the page. We'll see about that, Olaf said, grinning wickedly. I'm going to lock all of you in the brig, which is the official seafaring term for jail. We know what the brig is, Klaus said. I just marked that because it's the return of Klaus's, you know, trademark phrase there.
Yeah, we get a lot of returns in this part of the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, and I guess I might as well mention it now because I do have a note about that because I think it's really significant. It ties into your point that I was really puzzled why Snicket consistently comes back to the water cycle as a metaphor in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was looking at this going like, why don't you just use the story of Sisyphus?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
that seems like it just a much more obvious way of explaining this. The children thought of Sisyphus, the ancient Greek, story like from Greek mythology of pushing the boulder up the hill, you know what I mean, you get it up there, and then like it just tumbles back down, and it's just this endless cycle of
Mm-hmm.
doing this, and that seems to be their life, and
Right.
that seems like a better reference point for it. But then he uses the water cycle, and then I'm going, oh, this is actually a really lovely way of subtly, it's subtle until the end of the book,
Mm-hmm.
reiterating this point of the water cycle. It is the same water that is being collected and then
Right.
evaporated, and then you get precipitation, and that the kids ultimately are coming back to where they were before. They're just at various points in this cycle, but the cyclical nature to these books, that ultimately by the end of this, they end up back at Briny Beach. There's Mr. Poe at the end of the book, right? That
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of bookending what we had before. And then even you mentioning that with Klaus saying, we know what it is, then this is a return.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's it's interesting because of course there is you know, the I guess principle or some such that I mean it is a thing in AI, like in artificial intelligence
I
programming
know what
that
AI is.
that you know just doing the same task over and over again and then improving because of your knowledge of what did and didn't work. And that's, you know, when you're dealing with a cycle like this,
Mm.
then that's very relevant that this time the children are not going with Mr. Poe again. That they're like, well, that didn't work. So let's try this other avenue. And, you know, because it that really is what their decision is based on. It's everything that they've learned over the course of this cycle is you know, affecting how they move forward with the next cycle of their life. Um, yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah, no, I really like that. Hmm.
Um, all right. Well, hopping over to page 202. Um, oh, yes, this is the return of the Tagliatelle Grande.
Oh my goodness. I almost used that as our sponsor again because I was so happy to see this thing come back.
I knew you would be. Yeah, no, I love the fact that it came back and I uh, I mean apparently it's the exact same one as before. It survived all of this. It is still just as ineffective as ever.
I love the fact that is it not like it's Esme who's swinging it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And she's dressed as an octopus, so it's just like another tentacle essentially that she's
Right.
whipping around.
Yeah. Yeah, and even just, you know, the whole thing of all the snow scouts being on board. And I think it even says like that there are other children there, um,
Yeah.
which is really, really interesting. And of course, we have gotten this idea of, you know, there are so many fires being started, so many new orphans all the time. And it comes up later as well. where, Olaf is saying, yeah, I want to get all the different fortunes
Hmm.
from all these different families, specifically Widdershins is one of them. Um, and so I just think that it's interesting that, we're continuing along with that, where, he is just, I mean, an outright monster at this point, him and the two associates of his,
Right.
um, who do not make an appearance in this book. Um, but yeah, just this whole idea of like he is intentionally uh, capturing these children and presumably holding them hostage until they turn of age so that he can somehow get their fortunes.
Well, why
Um,
is he waiting until they turn of age? I
um,
guess because then they'll have it, so then it's easier to steal?
yeah, I think so.
Because he's never really had that plan before with the Baudelaires. It's always been unclear how he would get their fortune.
Yeah, I think that the idea is that they would inherit it, but then he would, yeah, get it from them, I think. I don't know. Or at the very least, turning them evil, um, which there's something to that. I mean, with Fernald,
Yeah.
the hook-handed man, and that seems to be the case for him. He didn't
Yeah.
start out uh, being evil, but after all of these different things, then he's just like, well, one thing after another, and eventually you find yourself on the wrong side. Um,
Right. But this is partially where I feel like the book is not working in some ways, where you've got Fiona and Fernald, and Fiona is insisting that nobody is villainous and all of this stuff. But then you see what Olaf and Esme are doing, and then
right,
the man with no hair, with a beard and no hair, and the one with hair but no beard. Like you
right,
see these people, and you're like, I don't understand how you can say that there is no such thing as a good and bad person in this universe. It just seems like
right.
such a strange idea to be introducing, and it seems like he's
Mm.
trying to introduce it in a fairly sincere way. But I question how effective that is.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's fair. Anyway, so those are my notes for chapter 9.
All right. Why don't you keep going with chapter 10?
Sure. My first note is, appropriately enough, the monologue that Snicket has at the very beginning of the chapter on the way sadness works. The way sadness works is one of the strange riddles of the world. If you are stricken with a great sadness, you may feel as if you have been set aflame, not only because of the enormous pain, but also because your sadness may spread over your life like smoke from an enormous fire. You might find it difficult to see anything but your own sadness, the way smoke can cover a landscape so that all anyone can see is black. You may find that happy things are tainted with sadness, the way smoke leaves its ashen colors and scents on everything it touches. And you may find that if someone pours water all over you, you are damp and distracted, but not cured of your sadness, the way a fire department can douse a fire, but never recover what has been burnt down. Um, yeah, I think that this passage works really, really well. It's such an interesting analogy here, um, and yeah, I think that to some degree, then that is very true. That I mean, he's essentially describing depression here,
Yeah.
where it's not just sadness, but it is depression, where it consumes your life, where it just even the good things don't seem that good anymore. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and it's a very effective way of describing it, but I think that I do wish that he used the word uh, depressed or depression somewhere in there.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that it's I really like that metaphor, and I did mark that. I said it's a really lovely metaphor because he does a great job in describing it. It's he has a few moments throughout the series where he's got these moments of profundity, and I think that this is one of them. It's quite
Yeah,
effective. And I also think that there's something to the fact that as these books are getting longer and the readers are very likely, at least many of them, are aging up with the series, that it's usually mental health issues and, specifically things like anxiety and depression often hit for the first time when a person is in that prepubescent to pubescent phase, right? It's
Right. Yeah.
usually like just as you're entering your teenage years that's where it often shows up. That we don't typically see it as much in children, although it does happen in children. But where it
Mhm.
most often seems to be, like if you ask adults, and I mean, I don't know enough about the psychological research, but I feel pretty confident in saying that, at least as best I understand it from all of the reading that I've done, most people who deal with mental health issues point to those years as when it started.
Mm.
Not all of them, not all of
Right.
them, but
Yeah.
many say the first time I encountered it, I was 13 or 14, maybe 15, somewhere in that range, sometimes 12, but somewhere right around there. And so I wonder if that's partially why he brings it up. That if he brought that up in book one, it probably would not have made much sense. But I think, like
Right.
to many
Yeah.
readers, but at this point, there's at least some readers who would recognize that and go, oh, you're speaking to me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Yeah. Um, all right. Unless you have more to say on that, then I'll move
Nope.
on to my next point.
Yeah, go for it.
Um, so on page 216, uh, got this funny, explanation. Let's just agree to disagree, the hook-handed man replied, using a tiresome expression, which here means, you're probably right, but I'm too embarrassed to admit it. And that is basically how that's always used. It's like,
Yep.
I don't want to talk about this anymore, so, regardless, I just don't want to argue. We're just, we'll move
Precisely.
on.
That is precisely it.
All right, next is on page 222. Um, so this is where Fernald is saying that, the Punctilio got everything wrong. He said, Captain Wittershins isn't my father, Wittershins isn't my last name, and there's much more to the fire than that. Um, you should know that the Daily Punctilio doesn't tell the whole story, Baudelaires. And it's interesting because it's Jacques Snicket who wrote that article. And it's, I guess because we've seen Jacques Snicket and he was presented as this good character, and you would think that based on the rules of this series that he's a writer, so he should be well read and he should be one of the good guys that he should have a good understanding of how to fact check and all that. And with this, then he got everything wrong, um, and that it ruined Fernald's life.
Um, yes. I mean, I think there's a couple things there. First of all, I don't know how accurate Snicket is trying to be here, but with any newspaper, then you're going to have an editor who the
Right.
journalist is not in charge of the final copy. So
Right. Yeah,
it could be that the editor changed things, even though
that's
Snicket wrote
true.
it down correctly.
Yeah.
Um, but the other thing, though, is have we still, we're in book 11, have we yet to meet a competent adult in this series?
No, I don't think
Like,
so.
they're all incompetent and bizarre and just, you know, they seem to get dumber the older they get.
Right. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
wonder if that's part of it because we don't really have much with Jacques Snicket. We've heard, you know, um, like from Quigley, where he said good things about him, but we didn't actually see that dramatized directly on the page.
Yeah. And even that, then,
He
Jacques
still
did.
like abandoned him.
Yeah. So that's a good point. Hmm. Yeah. So it's an interesting detail to add
Agreed.
um, to this universe, and it's just like, oh, okay, Jacques Snicket. It says, just as the poison of a deadly fungus can be the source of some wonderful medicines, someone like Jacques Snicket can do something villainous, and someone like Count Olaf can do something noble. even your parents, and then he's cut off.
Mhm.
And um, yeah, so it's and then Jacques Snicket is described as a good man, but Count Olaf murdered him, and so it's just this whole back and forth, and it's again getting into that discussion that we glazed over before of you know no one is pure evil or pure good. That is
Mhm.
all kind of about perspective.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it's I don't know. It's
It's
just a yeah,
it,
go
it's
ahead.
I think that it's a good passage.
Hmm.
Um, and it works well with this mushroom, right? That
Yeah.
you've got that particular variety of mushroom, and then saying it's incredibly poisonous, but poisonous things can actually, have properties that we can
Right.
use to heal
Yeah.
people. So I go, okay, this ties in really well, like in connection to people. But then it's like he is subverting and undercutting his own point by having cartoonish villains throughout the
Right.
series, even in this book. Then
Yeah.
Olaf and Esme remain cartoonish supervillains.
And Carmelita.
And Carmelita. Yeah, I mean, it's just so to me that's the problem, and this is my issue with a lot of postmodern literature, is that you can't say everything's ironic and detached and I'm never going to be sincere, and then occasionally say, but I'm going to throw out this really sincere concept that you've already subverted your own writing by doing that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, and it just continues on basically for the rest of the chapter there as well. With it just being the difference between what author they have on their uniform.
Oh,
Herman
yeah.
Herman Melville compared to Edgar Guest. Um, he was a writer of limited skill who wrote awkward, tedious poetry on hopelessly sentimental topics. You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, how prominent Edgar Guest is in, you know, uh, the study of literature in academics, but I if
I
he's
mean, I'm pretty familiar with the literary canon, and I did not know Edgar Guest. I
okay,
don't believe that he is in any of my Norton anthologies with poetry. Like,
gotcha.
I've never, I can't remember ever seeing the name until these books. Now, I think he was quite popular at the time
Ah,
when he was writing. I believe that he was a fairly popular writer, but there's a difference though between popular and critically acclaimed.
right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And I think that's the thing, is that he was popular, but critics didn't really care for his poetry.
gotcha. Okay. Well, anyway, that's all that I had for chapter 10.
Yeah, and you covered my notes with it as well. That those are the things that I wanted to mention, and yeah, the whole thing with oh, it all depends on who you've got on, like this whole trying to make it seem like it's shades of gray. I just don't understand how effective he thinks he's being in doing that
Right.
when he continues to return to cartoonish two-dimensional depictions of other characters. That the Baudelaires are perfect. they
Hmm.
they do everything right. They are virtuous and moral in every single scenario.
Yeah.
And
That
uh
even if, they do something bad, it's because they have no other option and yeah, all that. Yeah.
yeah. And I actually don't have any notes for chapter 11.
Oh, all right. Well, then I will keep going. Page 232. Um, let's see. Oh, yes. Uh, I'll just start from the beginning of that paragraph. There is nothing wicked about having a dreadful singing voice, any more than there is something wicked about having dreadful posture, dreadful cousins, or a dreadful pair of pants. Many noble and pleasant people have any number of these things, and there are even one or two kind individuals who have them all. But if you have something dreadful and you force it upon someone else, then you have done something quite wicked indeed. I think that's just it's so, I kind of talked about that before, where it's like I don't have a problem. Like people can do whatever they want as long as it doesn't affect, as long as it's not forced on other people, because that's where it becomes a problem. Because every individual has, the freedom of choice, and that forcing anything upon them is infringing on that right.
Yes, exactly. It's the classic. It's the definition of classical liberalism, right?
Mm,
The
yeah,
which is the right to extend my fist ends at the tip of your nose,
right.
right?
Yeah.
That it's effectively like I can do whatever I want as long as I'm not harming or hurting somebody else.
Hmm.
But so it's like there's nothing wrong with having dreadful things about you, but there is something wrong about foisting those things upon another person
Yeah.
against their will. And yeah, it's a good point, and I
Yeah.
think it's fairly well said.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, moving on to page 249. This is a quick note. Violet's 15th date. Um, it's an odd way of saying Violet's 15th birthday, but of course it's just because VFD. Um,
Right.
because I was just like, that's a really strange thing to say. Has she been on 14 dates so far? And I
Right.
don't get it. But then I was like, oh right, VFD.
Yeah.
Always coming back to that. All right, on page 250, uh, goodness, the description at the bottom of this page makes me so uncomfortable. I almost don't want to read it. Then without another word, they opened the tiny door of Sunny's helmet and quickly dragged their sister out, quickly shutting the door behind her so the fungus would not spread. At first, their sister looked completely unchanged, but when the wheezing young girl opened her mouth, they could see several gray stalks and caps of this horrible mushroom splotched with black as if someone had poured ink into Sunny's mouth. It's just such a horrible image to think of, these mushrooms growing in somebody's throat. I don't know.
That's the difference between you and I. I read horror all the time, so I didn't bat an eye. I was like, yeah, that's pretty good. And you're like, ah, like you cannot stomach horror. Most people can't, to be fair.
Right.
But I'm going, that's not doing anything for me. That's hardly a blip on my radar.
Gotcha. Um,
No, for these books though, for these books, that's good.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I guess I'm saying like even Goosebumps. Goosebumps are written for middle grade readers, and I think you can
Right.
get much grislier, more disturbing descriptions, like physical descriptions.
Mm.
Uh, with R.L. Stein. It's been a while since I've read a Goosebumps book, but I'm pretty sure I could find better examples.
Okay. Yeah, I need to read more of R.L. Stein because I really enjoy Goosebumps, but I haven't read nearly enough.
Gotcha. I mean, I've only got like 20 something, like personally.
Mm.
So that's
Gotcha.
it's a fair number.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to chapter 12, do you want to go first?
Sure. I've only got one note with chapter 12, and then I've got four in chapter 13. So this is on page 276, and really the bottom of 275 over to 276, where you have the reference to T.S. Eliot,
Hmm.
and specifically The Wasteland. So if you look at the bottom of 275, then the second last paragraph, I think I have the answer to that, Violet said, turning to her book of T.S. Eliot poems. Quigley used lines from a very long poem in this book called The Wasteland. I tried to read that, Klaus said, but I found T.S. Eliot too opaque, um, opaque, depending on your pronunciation.
Yeah, I've always pronounced it opaque, but
Yeah. I scarcely understood a word. Maybe it's all in code, Violet said. Listen to this, Quigley wrote, and then you have the poem itself. Okay, first of all, I think that I did actually mention T.S. Eliot in not the last podcast, but the one before, a week or
oh,
two
okay.
ago, when we were talking about Herman Melville and then calling his writing experimental. I said, look, he's no T.S. Eliot, like, or
Gotcha.
Ezra Pound, and I'm pretty sure that I name dropped T.S. Eliot. So it's funny that that shows up in the book.
Yeah.
Um, but the other thing that I really appreciate is there's actually a couple things here, but one of them is that it it's Klaus acknowledging that some poetry can be too opaque. It can be too dense for him to understand. And I'm
Right.
like, finally,
Yeah.
because, because even intelligent, highly literate professors of English and poetry will puzzle over some poems
Yeah.
and the meaning. Like there's even stuff I know. Like I had one of my professors in my Shakespeare course in university. Then she was a world class expert on Shakespeare. She literally worked at the Shakespeare Institute in England. Like she like in Stratford. Like I'm telling you, I forget exactly the name of it, but she worked directly there. I think out of grad school, and there were multiple parts when we would go through different plays where she would say it's unclear if he means this or if he means this,
Mhm.
and the text is ambiguous in that way. And
Right.
that's where I'm going, like, that's really understanding poetry, to act like it's just completely solving a riddle and that Klaus or Isadora are perfect at being able to do this. Uh, I like the fact because Eliot and the Wasteland is difficult to understand.
Mhm. Yeah,
It
I grazed through it and I was like, oh man, this is quite long and quite dense.
Yes, it is. It's long and dense. It's modernist poetry, and you know, it's yeah, it's tough to understand,
Mhm.
and because and Eliot doesn't really help the reader. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like he doesn't um, ultimately solve these things. He allows readers to puzzle over it and to try to determine what it is exactly that he means. It's not exactly, this is a terrible comparison, but I'm in so deep I might as well say it, that it's similar to modern art, right?
Mhm.
Once you start getting into modern art, then it's a little bit more interpretive on the part of the subject to try to determine what it is that the artist actually meant. And even whether you get the
Right.
actual meaning, the original intention of the artist or not, you can still derive other interpretations that the artist did not initially conceive of, but they're valid interpretations of the piece of art, right?
Mhm.
Because like modern um, physical art what like was going on at the same time, like Picasso for instance was painting at the same time as Eliot was writing poetry, and that this is the modernist movement, that when you look at Picasso's paintings, then you see he was certainly capable of painting things exactly as they appeared, but then he became far more subjective and surrealist and abstract in his paintings, and
Right.
that Eliot is closer to abstract in terms of poetry. He's not abstract, but I'm saying he's closer to that than what you would see with the neoclassical or romantic poets. So
Okay.
uh, anyway, I appreciate the fact that it does acknowledge that poetry can be difficult to understand. There's not always that perfect meaning
Right.
behind it. But I guess Klaus doesn't like that. So
Right.
it doesn't really say much for modernist poetry then. So I don't know. But the other thing, though, that I really like about this is that you have an excerpt from it where it says, at the pink hour when the eyes and back turn upward from the desk, when the human engine awaits, like a, and then initially, then he has like a pony throbbing party, but then knowing, well, that's not what the actual poem says. So then it says, like a, and then if there's even a few readers, children who are reading these books, like middle grade readers who are
Mhm.
reading these books, and they seek out The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot to try to find the last line of that's cut off
Yeah.
before they get to the end of the book, then I'm happy. I like the idea that these books, and I've said it before, that they're acting in some ways as gateway literature to
Right.
more adult, more complex, sophisticated literature, which is not to say there's not complex, sophisticated stuff going on in middle grade, but or young adult, because there certainly is, but to pull readers up, to encourage them to read stuff that's written for more mature audiences, like readers, a more
Yeah.
mature reader group. And I think that's what's happening here. And
Hey, I mean, it worked for me. I definitely was like, I don't remember if this actually does get, explained or like written out later on. So I'm just gonna look it up myself. So there you
yeah,
go.
yeah, and I did too. I did too. So I mean, that's both of us. I've studied The Wasteland before in university, but it's been a while since I've studied it twice, but it's been a long time, so I couldn't remember how that line goes.
Right.
So I'm saying
Yeah.
that at least for us, I mean, we're not the ideal reader group for this, the targeted group, but both of us did. So I'm hoping that there's at least some kids who've done that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree entirely.
And that's all that I
Um,
really had with chapter 12. I guess the only other thing that I should say with Elliot is that, and it has been a while, but as best I remember with the Wasteland, part of it was talking about like just the overall sense of despair and in some ways hopelessness that came out of World War One,
mm,
that the entire world was just going through this black cloud. You know what I
right.
mean? Like
Yeah.
just to have that awful experience. And so it's appropriate to see Elliot in these books.
hmm Yeah, well, that brings me to my note, which is on page 280, around about halfway through the last paragraph there. There are some who say that the poetry of Lewis Carroll is too whimsical, a word which here means full of comic nonsense, and other people complain that T.S. Eliot's poetry is too opaque, which refers to something that is unnecessarily complicated. But while everyone may not agree on the poets represented on the wooden table, every noble reader in the world agrees that the poet represented on Fiona's uniform was a writer of limited skill who wrote awkward, tedious poetry of hopelessly sentimental topics. So, the description of Lewis Carroll, his work being too whimsical, and the description of T.S. Eliot's poetry being too opaque, I think uh, at the very least, Handler put in here as a reference to these books themselves. That some find them too whimsical, others find them too opaque, and that it's just kind of interesting that he's, kind of saying like, these might be the reasons why some people don't like these books.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's fair because these books are whimsical at times.
Hmm.
And for my taste, they are too whimsical.
Right.
And at times, it's not entirely like they're intentionally opaque,
Right.
where
Yeah.
it's just like you obviously know the answer and there's no good reason to not tell us other than you just want to tease us to
Hmm.
force us to continue reading that this whole mystery. Like I'm not interested in the mystery, so I'm like, yes, this is fair, these are fair criticisms.
Yep.
To compare these books to T.S. Eliot The Wasteland, no.
Right.
Stop, no.
Yes.
But okay, like yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Definitely, I think that that's what he's doing. As to how, yeah, it's a bit extreme, but
Yeah, I mean, I'm not making, honestly, I'm not even making a value judgment. I just think that they're incomparable.
right. Yeah.
Like, 13 books in a middle grade series compared to a complex, dense modernist poem from 1922.
Yeah.
Those don't compare.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, so that was my only note for chapter 12.
Okay. I guess I might as well go first with chapter 13 because I have not really been contributing a lot of my own notes. All right, so on page 285, then I had this note, but I've already mentioned it before, where he goes into the water cycle again, and then I just wrote down why not use Sisyphus, why the water cycle, but then it does start to make sense as you get towards the end of the chapter.
Mhm.
Um, Pages 293 to 294. Now, we've seen this happen before, but he is reiterating the plot of this book.
Yes. Yeah.
And so let me just read just a small passage from that from the bottom of 293, and then I'll just make my point with this, where it says, "That's true," Fiona admitted quietly and looked down at the helmet. The Baudelaires looked down too, remembering their terrible journey through the grotto. They remembered how cold and dark it was when they left the Queequeg and drifted through the cavern, and the horrifying sight of the Medusoid mycelium. Did I get it right? Medusoid? How do you like
Yep.
to pronounce it? Medusoid mycelium, trapping them in the eerie cave until the stalks and caps waned away. They remember their chilly journey back to the submarine and the dreadful discoveries of the missing crew and the mushrooms sprouting inside Sunny's helmet, right? Etc. Etc. Now, this is not the only time that he's done this.
Mhm.
This book, I think, is particularly egregious for this, but I shouldn't even use the word egregious. But you have many instances of that in this book,
Yeah.
and he's done this many times before. Now, I've been puzzled over this, and sometimes it feels like he's just getting paid by the word,
Right.
where he doesn't have anything new to say, so he just repeats stuff that he said before. Think about how many times he said this with the water cycle.
Yeah.
But I think that this is different. So I'm wondering here, because we are on page 293 of this book, that this is not the longest one in the series, but I think it's the second longest so far, because
Yeah.
book 10 was a little bit longer. I think book 10 was like 4 pages longer.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But my note here is this to help slow readers?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that as well. I think that that might be the case. Just, you know, remind them of something that they maybe haven't read in weeks.
Yes.
Yeah,
Weeks or months. There are some kids who are very slow readers where they might only get through a couple pages a day.
right.
And you're looking at 293 pages, because I know plenty of kids. I've taught kids like this, even briefly when I was teaching, uh, seventh and eighth grade, that there's kids who are just, they're struggling readers, and they're not reading at a grade 7 grade 8 level,
Mm,
right?
yeah,
And so kids like that, who you just see how tough reading is for them, and sometimes there's learning disabilities, and sometimes there's other reasons for it, but they will read and they'll
right,
understand it, but they're really slow.
right,
And so a book like this might take them 2 or 3 months to read, and they'd enjoy it, but they do kind of need some refreshers along the way,
right,
and just to help jog their memory. But then for other readers, it's short enough that it's not incredibly tedious, and it can be helpful. You and I are obviously reading these books faster than most kids would read the books,
yeah.
despite the fact, like, the release schedule. But a little inside baseball, we've been doing these videos, much quicker than the release schedule.
Right.
and,
Yeah.
and so we don't need that refresher, but I think some kids do. And so once I started thinking about it like that, then I went, oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that it is uh, that is the case. That's what he's doing here. And I do appreciate that that effort to to make sure that children of all reading levels are able
Yes.
to enjoy his work. Um, and
Because he seems to be, it's like an apology for the fact that the books are getting long. It's a little bit like,
right,
I'm sorry, let me help.
yeah, yeah. And I also think that specifically with this book, um, there's a lot that happens
Yes.
compared to, say, the slippery slope where they just go up and down the waterfall a few times.
There's a lot of books, like, and I've noticed that, and I think that would be my biggest criticism of the series. I was thinking about this before, but I have not mentioned this on the actual podcast, that it feels at times like Snicket or Handler is writing for television with a limited budget. We can
Right.
only afford one set per season. Like, per book, we can only be in one place. It has to be incredibly limited. What if we just film the entire thing in an elevator shaft? You know what I mean?
Right.
It'll cost nothing. What if we film the entire thing at a circus where we only go inside like 2 or 3 tents?
Yeah.
Like, that's how it feels. And I'm like, dude, you can do anything. You have an unlimited budget. The only budget is your imagination, but that's how it feels. But
Right.
this book actually is different. That it starts with
Mhm.
them rushing down the mountain, then they get into this submarine, then they go into the Grim Grotto. They get into their underwater diving suits, and they go into the cave. They come back. Then you have another submarine. You have this other mystery shaped submarine object, something
Mhm.
floating. Then they travel all the way to Briny Beach by the end of this.
Right.
It's like there's a lot of scene changes and traveling going on in this book, more than I think any other book we've had.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. Um,
So it is most appropriate to remind readers of what's happened so far, because this is not necessarily the most complex book, but the most densely plotted.
right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even know that it's fair to call it densely plotted, but in comparison to what we've had before, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
comparatively densely plotted.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Um,
I've got one other set of notes here for chapter 13.
Okay.
So at the bottom of 301, I literally had to take two different notes on this. I will try to clean up my language from what my notes actually say. So this is where Fiona kisses Klaus. I'll just
Mm.
read from the bottom of 301. Fiona nodded sadly and walked to the wooden table. She picked up mushroom minutiae and then acted contrary to her personal philosophy, a phrase here, which means hesitated for a moment and faced the middle Baudelaire. When you think of me, she said quietly, think of a food you love very much. She leaned forward, kissed Klaus gently on the mouth, and disappeared through the porthole without so much as an eye. The three Baudelaires listened to the mycologist's footsteps as she joined Count Olaf and his comrades and left them behind. Okay, so my first note was, damn, that kind of it was obvious that they were flirting with each other, but she is a fair bit older
Yeah.
than Klaus. Like is he 13 at this point?
Yes, I believe
And
so.
she's at least 15, maybe
Right.
16. You're
Yeah.
going, okay. Well done, Klaus, I guess. I don't know what to say with this. But
Yeah.
before, it's interesting the way Snicket describes Klaus's first kiss in comparison, and presumably this is his first kiss,
Mhm.
but the way he describes this, he actually dramatizes this on the page, but he allows Violet's first kiss with Quigley on the mountain to be a private moment that is not shared on the page.
Right.
He gives her privacy. He does not give Klaus privacy. Klaus and Fiona, literally, this happened in front of his sister. What
Right.
the hell? You don't want your first kiss to happen in front of your older sister? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, and I do think that there is something to that, to the fact that, um, uh, with Klaus, then I guess Snicket wasn't really able to easily write in a moment of the two of them alone.
Oh, he could have. It's not that hard. Violet was taking care of Sunny in the kitchen. Sunny called for help and blah, blah, blah. And then they're together. Done. You could get them
Yeah,
alone. You need them alone.
that's a fair point. But back to the discussion that we started going down back in book four, of these books really seeming to be geared toward girls,
Yep.
then, of course, a girl wouldn't want anyone to know about her first kiss, but she might be interested in, um, knowing that her younger brother is growing up, that, oh, it's so cute, that
Oh,
he's
maybe.
growing up that way. So I'm wondering if it's partly that.
That's an interesting interpretation. Um, I was thinking that this is maybe the like a gender thing. So when it comes to like Klaus doesn't need or deserve privacy, but Violet does. That what a
Mhm.
girl does with a guy is don't spread that around. Don't talk about that, right?
Right.
That you
Yeah.
don't want to have a reputation of doing this, that, and whatever else with that boy over there. But a boy, it's like, oh yeah, this just happened. I want
Right.
everyone to know, right? That the whole like a
Yeah.
boy can, gets to be called a stud and a girl an S word that is not stud,
Yeah.
right? That it feels
Yeah.
like, is that what's happening? That the boy actually kind of wants it to be out there? Like,
Right.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, she was 16. And
Yeah.
then Violet's like, it doesn't matter what we did.
Right.
That
Yeah.
to allow her to maintain a certain amount of decorum.
Hmm.
I,
Yeah. It's uh I've always hated that double standard there, and everything that, the because Fiona is here, and that means,
that's what I'm saying is Fiona doesn't get that though. She doesn't get any sense of privacy, but
yeah.
Violet does.
Yeah.
And Fiona is the aggressor in this
Right.
case. Like she
Yeah.
is the one who's initiating the kiss,
Yeah.
and we don't know with Violet and Quigley.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it's definitely like this older woman who is leading Klaus. Like it seems like Fiona knows what she's doing and Klaus doesn't necessarily. And
Right.
there's
Yeah.
just all kinds of interesting stuff going on there. And then I have another note because then it just kept going. So this is on page 302, but this is the second paragraph, basically where I left off. She's gone, Klaus said, as if he could hardly believe it himself. He lifted one trembling hand to his face, as if Fiona had given him a slap instead of a kiss. How could she leave? He asked. She betrayed me. She betrayed all of us. How could someone so wonderful do something so terrible? I wrote, I didn't use this word, but I wrote, that's going to mess him up. That
Yeah,
is
that's
going
true.
to mess with him. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that kid is effed.
Right.
Poor Klaus, because
Yeah.
that is not a good experience of going, what was that? Like, okay, this older girl, I liked her, she's so pretty, and then she was the initiator of a kiss and all of this stuff, and then she does something awful all at the same time and abandoned me right when she did
Right.
that. And he was like, what? Like, this kid is going to need some therapy, and
Yeah.
I don't know about like any successful relationships in the future, at least not for a while. That's
Yeah.
some serious baggage I think he's going to carry with him. I think that was like the nastiest thing that Handler has done to any of these characters. Like,
That's a good
that was the
point.
worst. Parents dying, not that big of a deal. That, uh-oh.
Yeah, yeah. A lifetime of emotional turmoil.
Yeah, totally. This
One
kid is
moment.
so damaged now.
Yeah.
If it weren't for the fact that he's fictional, I'd really be concerned.
Right. Yeah. And I do think that from my memory, I believe they toned down Fiona's age a bit for the Netflix series.
That's
Um,
probably appropriate.
yeah.
16-year-old kissing a 13-year-old would not look good on screen.
No. Um, all right. So those were your notes for chapter 13.
Yep.
Right. I have a couple more. One is on page 310. Um, this is, man, in the final analysis, I'm just going to read, this paragraph basically. A phrase which here means after much thought and some debate with my colleagues, Captain Wittershins was wrong about a great many things. He was wrong about his personal philosophy because there are plenty of times when one should hesitate. He was wrong about his wife's death because, as Fiona suspected, Mrs. Wittershins did not die in a manatee accident. He was wrong to call Phil Cookie when it is more polite to call someone by their proper name. Really, Handler? Really? Or Snicket? Really? You're saying that you shouldn't refer to somebody by their, most visible
Person who looked like neither a man nor a woman, the two white-faced women, hook-handed man.
Yeah. Um, Man, there are so many things that are happening in this paragraph. Because, yeah, even, he was wrong about his wife's death because, as Fiona suspected, Mrs. Wittershins did not die in a manatee accident. Well, how did she die? Or did she not die? I'm so thrown off here.
Was it not an accident?
Right,
Just
yeah.
roll the manatee on top of me. I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was wrong to abandon the Queequeg no matter what he heard from the woman who came to fetch him, which is interesting because we still don't know, really who that woman was. Um, I don't know if you have ideas about that.
No, I mean, I've been puzzling over it, and I'm not quite sure who that would be because it doesn't describe it. It doesn't describe her as a girl. It says woman. Because
Right.
initially I was kind of thinking, well, what is that, like Isadora maybe
Mm.
somehow making a reappearance, or what is this, like maybe Snicket's sister?
Yeah, I know. I'm wondering if that's the case. If it is Kit Snicket, but yeah, I'm not sure, and I don't believe that ever actually really
Oh,
gets resolved.
maybe it's Aunt Josephine. The Grim Grotto would be the perfect place to hide from realtors.
Oh. That's interesting.
We know that she likes caves, and I insist that she's still alive because we did not see her die on the page.
Right. Hmm.
It's
That could
Aunt
be very interesting.
Josephine. I've solved it. Fan theory. That I could do an entire YouTube video, all clickbaity fan theory. Aunt Josephine's not dead. She's actually in the Gorgonian grotto. My first piece of evidence.
Yep, absolutely. All right. It goes on. Captain Wittershins was wrong to trust his stepson for so many years, and wrong to participate in the destruction of Anwhistle Aquatics. So this is revealing that Fernald was not the only one who was responsible for the Anwhistle Aquatics fire.
Mhm.
That yeah, the Captain Wittershins was part of that. But then why does he not trust his stepson? Um, uh, yeah, and he was wrong to insist, as he did so many years ago, that a story in the Daily Punctilio was completely true, and to show this article to so many volunteers, including the Baudelaire parents, the Snicket siblings, and the woman I happened to love. And again, then I'm just like, well, which article is that? There have been so many articles, and it's just this one paragraph raises so many questions, and I don't know. It's fascinating to puzzle over it, but at the same time, I'm like, well, I don't know if I should keep puzzling over this, or how many of these are going to be answered in the next couple books, or you know anything like that.
Right, and
Um,
you don't remember?
no, not. Yeah, there are a number of things here that I'm not remembering.
No, I
So,
get it. I
yeah.
mean, like, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of small little details that get very little attention paid on the actual page
Yeah.
that he's bringing up. There's these small little threads that he's pulling out that he's teasing us with,
Mhm.
and but you are right. This is a dense paragraph that is bringing out one thing after another.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So anyway, so that's that note. And my last note um, is quite quick. I love that Mr. Poe returns, and it's so much fun to get his bumbling nonsense again.
Yes.
Since we've gotten a break from him for so long, then I think that's why it really works so well. Um, but yeah, just on page 317, when Mr. Poe says, the message is signed JS, Mr. Poe said, which incidentally, I did remember that there is also Jerome Squalor. That's another JS from the series.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Yes.
uh, yes, Mr. Poe said, I assume that it's the reporter from the Daily Punctilio, Geraldine Julien. Um, that's not that's not that person's initials. What
No,
makes you think that it's that?
I have no idea what's going on with that. Uh, like, is it because I gotta think that there's no point in puzzling over other than just going, that's not it at all. That's
Right.
funny.
Yeah.
Or going, well, some people who don't know spelling very well might think that Geraldine starts with a J, and then Julian, if it's in cursive, a J can kind of look like an S.
I guess.
I don't know. It probably doesn't deserve that level of scrutiny,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying that's the only thing I can consider.
Yeah, no, I just think that it's so funny that that's his first guess. His first and only guess. Oh, it
Yeah,
has to be GJ then. No.
yeah. I really
Um,
like the fact that I don't know if you're going to bring this up, but on 317 at the bottom, when he brings up, like, because he's not even angry with them or concerned, really. He just says, it was very inconsiderate of you to run away without telling me where you were, particularly when you've been accused of murder, arson, kidnapping, and some assorted misdemeanors. Uh,
yep.
yeah. If I ever get accused of all of those things, I want somebody like Mr. Poe to arrest me. It's It's very inconsiderate that you ran away, considering that we think that you've murdered people, committed arson, kidnapping, and some assorted misdemeanors. It was inconsiderate to not just immediately turn yourself in. It's such a great understatement.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was all that I had for the end of this book.
Okay, that's great. I mean, I feel pretty good about where things are at because I'm much more satisfied with this book than I have been with many of the books in the series. And I, now that I've read the entire thing, I will say that this is perhaps the strongest one in the series to date,
Yeah.
up until this point. And I do look at this because there's a couple things that are going on. Number one, you have them going off with somebody else, with Kit Snicket at the very end, where it's not just like, where are we going to go? Who knows? Like, we'll just go to some mysterious place. But this is actually essentially getting us started with the next book at the very end of this one. And then I like the fact that you've got the most interesting part of the book to me, or the series to me, is whatever this question mark thing is in the deep water. I don't know what it is, but everything else is just like, oh, that's Olaf with one of his, another zany scheme to get their fortune. But this is like, what is going on there? And it's an interesting thing to bring up something this mysterious in book 11 when there's only 2 to go.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. It is, such a strange turn to just be like,
exactly.
oh, there's this giant thing that you don't even want to describe, like how terrible it is. You don't want to say whether it's a mechanical thing or some kind of beast or what.
Exactly. And I mentioned it before that it's very Lovecraftian in the description, or in the lack of description, because of how terrifying it is. And so I like that little Lovecraft element that we have here, because Olaf to me is not particularly interesting, and his schemes are not particularly interesting. But this thing, you go, oh, now there's real evil. Because as like, Olaf is just like cartoonishly evil, but that's basically it. But this other thing is like, ooh, if it's something that even the bad guy is scared of, now you're doing something interesting.
And so the last few pages of the book,
there's a lot of them.
There are
the letters to the editor where they're just scraps, and he keeps trying because they keep getting erased or ripped up.
And they are from the Hotel Denouement, and they do have the BFD logo in the bottom corner.
Yes.
So not much to say with those because you really can't parse much from them.
No. What's the name of the next book? Because I don't think that it even says it.
No, I don't believe that it does. The next book is The Penultimate Peril, right here.
Okay.
Yes, and I will tell you that it does feature the Hotel Denouement very prominently. It's a good one from what I remember.
Okay. Well, that's great. All right. Well, we will get into that. Chapters 1 to 4 of the penultimate. What is it?
Yeah, the Penultimate Peril.
Penultimate Peril. We'll get to that next week, chapters 1 to 4. All right, folks, feel free to comment below, and thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Ignore the tattoo! A phrase here which means like, comment, subscribe, and share this podcast across the web. That may seem like a strange definition, but in this context, it is entirely accurate.